Take it
I
away.
just want, before Danielle takes the floor, I would just like to say that the hobby of tabletop RPGs was omitted from the bio, and I think it is important to mention that as well. All right,
All right.
go to town, Danielle. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let me share my screen. You can see it, right?
Yeah, we see you.
All right. All right. So, okay, today I'm going to talk about some updates on the crypto economy. I am kind of assuming that most of you here are at least a little bit familiar with the basics of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but if not, that's fine because I'm going to go over some of the foundations too. Uh, just a little bit about me again, even though I was very brilliantly introduced by Bakshi. I'm an interpreter, translator, Brazilian and Canadian. I've studied a whole bunch of disparate things in my life. I'm certified and a member of many different associations and a huge nerd. I think it needs to be repeated. All right, so here's our program for today. Like I said, the foundations. Then we'll look at wallets, hardware and software. Then we'll actually begin with the updates part, which is the integration between the traditional banking and the crypto economy, as well as stablecoins and CBDCs. Then we'll go into smart contracts and then Web3 stuff such as NFTs, decentralized apps, and DeFi, among others. All right, so the very basic foundation, and this is a sentence that is very complex, but everyone needs to understand, is that Bitcoin is a cryptographic, decentralized, trustless ledger and a fungible digital currency. That's a lot to digest, so let's look at them one at a time. Cryptographic refers specifically to something called a hash function, which is a math formula that essentially you take an input, you apply the math formula called the hash function, and it gives you output that is always the exact same size regardless of the input. It's a type of encryption, but it's a specific one. So you can see that A, B, and C over here, all their outputs are all different from one another, but they're all the same length. Now, you may be wondering about the length and concerned with security, but don't worry because Bitcoin uses an algorithm called SHA-256 or 256-bit encryption, which basically means that there are this is one number. This is the huge number of different possibilities in the SHA-256 algorithm. That's 10 to the 77 possible values, which comes out to, all right, you're all here to practice interpreting, right? So I'm going to read out this number. Get ready. It's 115 quator vigintillion. Of course, I'm just kidding. I could not ever. But it's very interesting. If you look at this, you'll learn a lot about large numbers. It's just insane the amount of possibilities are. And to give you some context, there are 10 to the 80 atoms in the known universe. So that means that with today's technology, reversing a Bitcoin address would take something like 23 million years. So it's very safe. It's much safer than anything else that exists on the planet today. Okay, so after the hash function, we have this other aspect called asymmetric encryption. And basically what this means is uh, you have your private key here on the left, you have your public key in the middle, and then you have the crypto address, which is also public. Basically, the private key is your password that you will use to decrypt or encrypt the public key, and that gives you the crypto address. So if you look here at this very beautiful graph, you can see that if you have a private key and a public key, then you can get an address. And if you have an address but don't have the private key, and do have the public key, then you can't do anything with only that. In order to control the wallet, the funds, you need all three, the address, the private key, and the public key. I'm not going to go into, the actual details of how it works, but this is essentially how it works. You need these three elements, and this one is derived from these two. All right. Next, we have decentralization. And this essentially just means that the Bitcoin network, it's a network of different computers all running the same program all around the world. And every value is always identical everywhere. There's no lag time between them. The network is created in such a way that no matter what computer you're looking at, everything is always going to be exactly the same. And that's very important. Next is something called trustlessness. Trustless means the opposite of what you're thinking. It means you can trust it because it means you don't need to trust it. If you compare it here on the right with fiat, fiat comes from Latin, from the word fiat, which means make it so. And essentially, fiat means that someone you already trust or fear tells you this thing is trustworthy. So that can come from, let's say, the King of England, the Fed, the Brazilian central bank, the central bank of any other country. And if you trust that institution or that person, then you need to trust whatever they're telling you is trustworthy. But if you go back here on the left, trustless means that you can inspect the code yourself because it's open source, and you can see for yourself what it does. Or maybe you're not very good with computers. That's fine. If you can find someone who is and someone that you trust, then you trust them, but you choose to trust them. You're not being required to trust them. So essentially, decentralization and open source means that if you trust the protocol, then you don't need to trust a stranger. Unlike with fiat, where you do need to trust many different strangers. All right, next is the ledger. Now, Bitcoin is often seen as a currency, but more specifically, it's actually a ledger. It's an accounting register. It has a full record of the entire previous block and consequently all of the other previous blocks, all the way to the very beginning. This is publicly available information for anyone who can look at it, who knows how to look at it. And that means that anyone can audit the entire blockchain all the way to the beginning. It's also important to note that a new block can only be added if it's mathematically valid. And that's where we get the term mining. Mining just refers to the fact that when you want to add a new block to the blockchain, you basically need to solve a very complex equation. And whoever resolves that equation first, everyone in the world who's a miner competes to solve it first, and whoever solves it first earns, I don't know how many Bitcoin. That's how the system works. And thirdly, once a new block has been added and confirmed and included into the subsequent blocks, it is absolutely immutable. It can never, ever, ever, ever be changed at all for any reason. So that these three components make the blockchain a very secure ledger. And just to give you a visual of what I mean before, here you see that each subsequent block includes the previous block inside it. The Merkle root is basically the hash function. And just to illustrate. All right, next we have fungibility. Bitcoin is a fungible currency, which means that if you have one Bitcoin and then someone gives you one more Bitcoin, then you have two Bitcoin, obviously. But if you want to sell half of a Bitcoin, it doesn't matter where each piece came from because every unit is the same as every other unit. Now, if you compare that with gold, gold is also fungible, but it's a physical currency. So let's say you have a 1 kilogram bar of gold and someone gives you another 1 kilogram bar of gold. You do not magically have one 2 kilogram bar of gold. No, you have two 1 kilogram bars. So if you want to sell 500 grams of gold, you would need to choose what bar to break in two. This means that the gold at this point is not funged, which is not a real word, but totally should be. Now, if instead you melt down your gold, then you can forge it into one 2 kilogram bar. That means that gold is fungible. It can be melted, again, from Latin. Now, if you compare these two, which are fungible, if you compare that here with non-fungible at the bottom, non-fungible means everything that is different from other units. So expensive art, jewelry, real estate, collectibles, and NFTs, as we'll see later on. And lastly, it is a digital currency. So that means that like any other currency, you can buy it, sell it, earn it, spend it, save it, invest it, give it away, whatever. It's a currency. All right, so there we have it. Bitcoin is a cryptographic, decentralized, trustless ledger and fungible digital currency. All right, so now let's move into some of the new updates. But first, we need to look at where we store Bitcoins. Back in the old days of the Wild West, quando tudo aqui era mato, we only had software wallets. And this is basically what they look like. You can have them on your phone, on your computer, whatever. But actually, the safest way to store your Bitcoin is in a hardware wallet. And here we have 3 or 4 different examples of hardware wallets. I think the most interesting one is here on the right. This string of this code and these words, these are actually a cryptographic password that stores your entire public and private keys. This means that if you lose this device here or anything, all you need in the world is this. With this card, you can have access to your Bitcoin wallet. And here are some other ones. In practice, though, most of the time, your wallet is going to be this thing or something like it, where you basically press a button to make a payment or read out a code and show someone a QR code, and they'll scan it in to give you money. All right, now into integration. There are 2 different types, and these are some very interesting new developments. First, we have crypto into banking. There are many different card processors that all have the crypto debit cards now. We've got MasterCard, Visa, Amex, Elo, lots of other ones around the world. And basically, this is a prepaid card, like a debit card. You will take cryptocurrencies, you deposit them into a specific account, and then that account is used whenever you want to spend money. So you can go to any store. The store doesn't need to, quote unquote, accept crypto. Any store that accepts one of these 4 processors will accept your Bitcoin. So it's a very easy way to spend crypto. I'm saying Bitcoin, but there are actually many different currencies, right? What I do mean is crypto. And we've also got integration the other way around from the traditional banking world into the world of crypto. So here's a very interesting new development with MasterCard. This is actually brand spanking new. This is published and went live in May 2024. So it's less than a month old. And basically what it does is, well, first of all, the trust. Everyone trusts MasterCard. So if you trust MasterCard, then MasterCard will trust you once you give them the right credentials. And they basically create an alias for your wallet. So here's a breakdown of how it works. Sorry, this is a little complex, but I couldn't find a better way to explain it. Traditionally, here on the top, let's say this is your wallet address, and you want to send it in blue, and you want to send it to this tan one. They look similar, right? But they're different. So usually to make the transfer, you would go through the Bitcoin protocol. Now with MasterCard, you will enter in your actual email address or any other code like a PIX code or similar to, not exactly, but similar to a PIX code. And then MasterCard will convert that securely into your wallet code. Then the funds get transferred. And then MasterCard again converts that into the recipient's email address. So in practice, this means you won't need to know this stuff. You just need your address and the destination address and vice versa. And you can transfer money that way. This is going to be really revolutionary in how the process works. Actually, speaking of revolutionary, I completely forgot to ask the poll questions. Pachi, Daniel, can you help me with the poll? I should have done this in the very beginning. So just to get this translated, on a scale of 0 to 5, how familiar are you with crypto as a whole? 0 meaning absolutely nothing, and 5 meaning, you're very familiar with it. Let me just get some water while you guys answer.
I have all three questions at once, so if you want to go through all of them,
Oh,
that'll be
that's right.
easier.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Oh, you're right. You're right. So, secondly, while you answer that, the question is, do you own any crypto? And thirdly, regardless of whether you understand it or whether you earn anything, how significant do you think crypto is overall?
Answers still coming in. I'm not sure you can
Mhm.
see as a co-host the results of the poll. Can you see?
Yeah, I do.
Ah, okay, perfect.
Very interesting. Very heterogeneous group we've got here. Usually when I ask this question, everyone's like 0. I don't know anything about it. I'm very happy to see that we've got lots of people who are higher than 0.
I am also curious as to whether there has been some change in this after these past first months of the year where work has
Hmm.
been down for a lot of people, if that
Mm.
has prompted anybody to look into crypto.
That's a good point too. Yeah.
Okay, I think we got
All
about
right. Yeah.
20 responses. That should be
Yeah.
a good representation of the group.
Yes. Perfect. All right. Do these get saved or should I take a screenshot?
They're supposed to get saved, but feel free to screenshot it. It's fine.
Okay. Hang on. Let me just do that then. Oh, someone just answered. All right. I'm going to close the poll. So if you're thinking about an answer, now is your chance. All right. And here's the results for those of you who are curious. It's too bad that that Zoom doesn't share the results because then the hosts are always like talking about the results and all the participants are just wondering, what the
No,
hell
no,
are they talking about?
I actually just shared the results. They can see it. They can see it now.
Okay, okay, great. All right, so I'm going to close the polls window. Hang on, let me take a new screenshot first. Doo-doo-doo. All right. Okay. So, continuing on the topic of integration, there's another type of integration called stablecoins and also CBDCs, which are even newer. Stablecoins are cryptocurrencies whose value is pegged to an external reference, for instance, the dollar, the euro, or commodities such as gold, and they are regulated by a company or a consortium of companies. So some examples are there's one called a USD coin, which is organized, it's controlled by a company called Coinbase Inc. And what they do is every time the price of the US dollar goes up or down, they alter the price of USD coin. And conversely, the price of USD coin never changes. So it's always a fixed cost to buy it, unlike other current cryptocurrencies that are usually floating. And another example is Tether Gold, which is always the exact price of 1 troy ounce of 0.99 purity gold sold, I think, in Canada or the UK. I don't remember exactly where, but it's controlled by a company called Tether Operations Limited. And actually on the same side of that coin, we've got CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies. They're exactly the same, except they're created and regulated by a central bank and not a private business. So some examples include the digital real X, called Drex for some reason. I wish they'd listen to me because that is a terrible name for so many different reasons, but whatever. It's being created by the Bassin, and it's going to be exactly a digital version of the real. It's going to compete with PIX transfers when it's finished and created. Another example is the digital renminbi, or ECNY, which was created by the Central Bank of China and already works. In China, if the government wants you to do something, people do it. So people are using this all the time there, and it's a great use case. It's a great example of digital currencies being used. Next, now this is actually Web3 stuff from now on, and I'll explain what that means near the end. So here we have smart contracts, which are basically they're software that runs on its own. It's self-executing, and it resides in and runs on the blockchain itself. So it's not stored in anyone's computer or even on a specific server. Instead, it's run on the emergent network that comes out of the different computers running the blockchain. So it's really stored on the cloud in the very literal sense. And again, like all the properties of the blockchain, it is open source, auditable, decentralized, trustless, and uninterruptible when the conditions are met. So what are smart contracts used for? Well, one example is for loan instruments. I can create a smart contract that says, if you give me $100, then I will give you $10 11 times every 30 days. So it's basically a loan. You give me 100 now, I'll give you 110 over a period of time. And this is it follows all of these principles, which means that if you trust the protocol, then you don't need to trust whatever issuer of the bond or the CDB is. You don't need to trust anyone because you look at the source code and you know that it is 100% trustable or reliable. So we've got smart contracts as early as the Bitcoin blockchain. And this is a good point to mention that there are many different cryptocurrencies. One of special note is called Ethereum, especially it's Ether or Ethereum. There are two different names. And it's basically it's a competitor, I guess. You could think of it that way, to Bitcoin. But it's a newer development than Bitcoin, and it was designed to specifically support much more complex on-chain software. So with Ethereum, we were able to have NFTs, dApps, DeFi, and so much more. Bitcoin does support very simple smart contracts, but for a number of reasons, it's not feasible to actually run them on Bitcoin, not in practice. For that, most of the time, like 100% of people use Ethereum or some other Ethereum derivative. So next we have NFTs. I talked about fungibility before. Just to recap, non-fungible NFTs, non-fungible tokens, means that each one is unique and different from the others. They may be equivalent, but they're not the same. So let's say I own two identical houses in the same condo. They are exactly the same. They were created exactly the same. Well, they're not the same house, even though they are functionally equivalent. They may be neighbors to one another, but they're not the same house. And NFTs, the other component is that it's a token. It's not really a currency. So token is a simple way to refer to a digital deed of ownership. And some of the use cases for NFTs include digital art and music, which is actually stored in the blockchain. Or you can have deeds of ownership to game items, virtual collectibles, virtual real estate, like we have in metaverses. You can use an NFT to represent securely that you own remotely a bar of gold that is stored somewhere at a bank that you trust. You can also record ownership of domain names, membership to a club or to a gym. There's a gym in the US where the membership isn't really a membership card. The membership is stored in the blockchain. And you can also have event tickets. Like let's say you're going to a concert. This concert can store that event ticket on the blockchain. So you won't need to use like Ticketmaster or Simpla or any other of those companies. You'll use the blockchain instead. After NFTs, we have dApps or decentralized applications. These are similar to smart contracts, but they're much more complex. They're actual computer programs, really. They're not just like a, a, a set of instructions, although, computer code is a set of instructions. So there's some gray space there, but they wouldn't be described as contracts. They'd be described as software, as programs. And again, they are open source, peer-to-peer, transparent, and automated, and they use the blockchain for RAM, for CPU, for everything. You're not running that on your computer, you're running that on the network. Some examples include financial applications such as DeFi, games, social networks. And here are some specific examples. These 6 programs are examples of dApps. So we've got Uniswap and Compound, which are DeFi. They are a crypto exchange and lending platform specifically. We've got Minds, which is a social network like Facebook. Peepeth, which is microblogging like Twitter. VeChain is very, very interesting. It is used for supply chain management and for verifying the authenticity of products. So you can use that to verify, organically sourced coffee beans or beef or something like that, or even much more expensive industrial equipment, whatever. And then also very interesting, you've got Filecoin, which is a decentralized storage network where you can, quote unquote, rent out space on your computer and get money that way. It's like Johnny Mnemonic, if you remember that movie, where basically it's a cyberpunk world where people rent out brain space and they don't have access to the memories, but they carry around secure data from one corporation to another. So that's what Filecoin is. And there are lots and lots and lots of different games. All right. Now I've mentioned Web3, and Web3 is basically essentially composed of DeFi, DEX, and DAOs. Just to go over them again, DeFi is decentralized finance in the traditional sense, I guess. So it involves lending, borrowing, and trading money for different reasons. And importantly, there are no traditional intermediaries like the banks usually do. DEX, decentralized exchanges, are similar, except they're specifically made for trading crypto. When you look at those charts with the red and green candle bars and all that stuff, that is an exchange, and a DEX is a decentralized one. And then, very interesting again, this is a new development too, we have DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. Now, they are organizations that are governed by smart contracts and operated by people who own equity stake in that company. And all of this is done through the blockchain. So on the blockchain, you will buy a NFT that represents your stake in a corporation or an association or whatever. And then that association is bound by the articles of incorporation that are stored as a smart contract. So you don't need the the São Paulo State Trade Board to authorize you. You don't need to pay the Junta Comercial any fees or anything like that, because it uses the blockchain for all of that oversight. And I mentioned Web 3, just to go over what Webs 1, 2, and 3 are. Web 1 was the original internet that really gained prominence in the 1990s. It's called the static web or read-only web, where basically you had websites and users could go and view them, but not really participate. Sometimes you could like sign a guest book, but even that's a relatively new development. Then we have Web 2, which began when the social media sites began to grow. It's called the social web or the read-write web. And it's basically defined as the period of the web where users really participate and create and share their content, but they're still controlled by centralized platforms. So Facebook moderates or should moderate what you post there. So it's still controlled by one central organization. And it's basically defined as social media, e-commerce, and streaming services. And now, lastly, we have Web3, which started, we could round it out and say the 2020s. And it's basically the peer-to-peer web. It's based around all these principles that I mentioned, such as decentralization, trustlessness, and user empowerment. And it's about ending the reliance on central authorities and intermediaries. And it includes all of these different programs I mentioned, DeFi, NFTs, DAOs, dApps, and so many others. All right, and that's basically it. I want to say thank you for listening to my talk. And that's it. I'm open for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm sorry.